All right, thank you. I apologize for that technical difficulty. Okay, so first, first action item for the group is to elect a spokesperson. This person will
We did that in your absence, Gina.
you guys are amazing.
Chris stepped up and agreed to do it.
Fantastic. Okay, so then for this particular agenda item, this working session, where our discussion on the format for debates, including possible structuring of legislative debates by party and chamber. So I think at this point you have the context that we provided previously, and I think you're welcome to open it up to discussion. Again, it's the overall format. So you can definitely consider, should we break apart our events and structure them so that we are only having debates between the partisan candidates and their opponents and by chamber, or if there's any other format discussions items that you'd like to discuss, this is the time to do it.
You want me to start in at this again?
Whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I'll if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll start, I guess, because
Sure, Bob.
I've always been supportive of the fact that you break up the House and the Senate. Having run several times in my lifetime, I can tell you that debates would be more robust. You would hear more from the candidates because of the amount of candidates that you just basically put up on a dais and ask 7 questions, and then your debate is done, even in an hour. And I think I think it would benefit, and obviously the party situation, as constantly mentioned the last time, I think it was a great idea, and having the parties really deal in the primary side of it with their candidates. And I was thinking of the ups and downs on this, but I think it would be more responsible. So I like that idea the other day, but I definitely believe there is a need to distinguish the difference between the Senate and the House, and the difference between the candidates and the issues.
I just want to clarify, do you think there ought to be, let's talk just about the primary first.
Sure.
Should there be one debate for the Republicans running for the House, and one debate for the Democrats running for the House, and one debate for the Republicans running for the Senate, and one debate for the Democrats running for the Senate?
Yes.
That's 4 debates where we have one now.
Yeah, I believe that it's a great idea, because until you come together for a general election, you're running an election for your party's nomination. So it's more party issue in many respects than overall general issue, until you get there. And then when you're your party's nominee and you're running against the other party nominee, you are obviously distinctly different in the offices that you're running for, whether it's the House or the Senate. It's just not the same. And you really don't get to know the candidates that well in that short period of time that they get to say 1 or 2 things, and it tends that the party gangs up on the things. It just takes the time away. No matter how well it's moderated, it takes the time away to get down to some of the real issues that the public would really want to know, because there are distinct differences, obviously, between candidates, parties, and other things. We know that, but you've got to people don't really have enough time who are running for a distinctly separate office. Senate is different from the House, and the House is different from the Senate. And otherwise, you could put the superintendent of public instruction in with the governor's race. I mean, if that's the case, it's a statewide race, and just consider it that way. You have to, and I think it would make it more meaningful for the candidate and more meaningful for the debate structure overall. I don't want to take up all the time.
Okay, Terry, you don't need to raise your hand. We'll be a lot less formal here in these breakout sessions.
Thank you. I can appreciate wanting more time for the candidates. I'm just wondering, as I heard Gina talk about the structure and the schedule, how feasible that really is to have, say, 4 different scheduled debates versus breaking it up within the same evening. And then also, if you're, as a voter, going to 4 different debates or attending them versus one item I can take out of my schedule, I would guess, but Gina would know this better, certainly all of you would than I would, that having one big block of time would really be more appealing in marketing and communications and getting people to attend the debate. So I just wanted to raise that as an issue for those who are in the throes of doing this all the time and ask what the reality is on that.
I can't find the button to raise my hand. So good thing we're not requiring it. For those who weren't here last time, the mention we made in terms of having parties involved really was just for primary debates, and it had to do with the parties themselves, since the primary debates are restricted to partisan candidates, helping provide moderators as a way of eliminating charges or accusations of bias, and to ensure that the content is better geared towards that party's voters. As far as splitting them up, if the schedule makes it to where you can't have 4 separate ones, at the minimum, you need to separate Republican primaries from Democrat primaries, because the topics are so very different and the interests of the audience are so very different, that you may not have time to separate state house from state senate. Okay, fine. I mean, if you can't, you can't. If it's a question of, well, we don't have time for twice as many meetings or debates, then make them half as long and have twice as many of them. You still haven't denied candidates time they wouldn't get anyway. If 10 candidates have to split an hour compared to 5 candidates splitting half an hour, it's the same for the candidates. But you'll provide content that is far more applicable and interesting to the audience. Republicans don't tend to watch Democrat primary debates for president or governor or anything like that. We'll all watch the generals. Democrats tend not to watch Republican primary debates for that very reason.
I don't know how informal we are, if I can just jump in, but from the last time, one of my big concerns is, as a longtime independent who needs to track all of these, when you have one debate, and by the way, I'm representing a huge number of people in the state. And so I just want to raise the awareness for the large number of independents. It's not just about Republicans and Democrats. We're trying to decide from both parties which race to vote in and who to vote for. I just want to make sure that's part of the thought process.
Yeah, if they can, this next go round, you're gonna have 3 parties. So, you're gonna have to figure it out. So, I mean, it's the time constraint is a time constraint that we create. The rules that we currently operate under are the rules that we currently operate under. I think we need to change somewhat with the time. Look, I went through 7 debates over my time, clean elections debates, and how many that I went through on the city council in Chandler. I'm all for debates and getting the thing out, but the point of going down the line and asking the same question of candidates it has to change, because we're not getting the dynamics we're asking for. And if we're going to do things out of convenience, then that's a whole nother issue. Then I said the last time, you have to make these things meaningful for me to want to show up, to put myself out there to answer the questions. Otherwise, I can just say no, like a lot of people do, and you're not getting the outcome. As a clean elections organization, you're not getting the outcome you want. And believe it or not, a lot of them don't do it because they go, "Hey, I'm going to sit there for whatever, and I'm going to answer 4 questions, and I've spent an hour or 2 hours of my time to answer 4 questions or getting ganged up on." So that's why I liked in the primary dealing with the parties. And if you're an independent, you've chose to be an independent. So if you have to watch 2 debates, then you watch 2 debates. That's your choice. Or you become a member of the party and you watch your party debate. I mean, that's kind of how it goes. I mean, are we shifting so far over to compensate for one aspect of it? I mean, I know a lot of people that are independents and they participate in what they participate in.
Tara?
Is that Tara? Sorry. Is that what you
Yes,
said?
yes. I see.
I'm just going to raise another issue of consideration for having a debate that has all candidates. I don't think there should be extra burdens placed on independents when there's so many of us now. And I've been one for over 20 years, no, actually 30, almost 30. And here's the other thing as part of the consideration, everyone is talking about the increased polarization and uncivil dialogue that is happening in debates. If you have primaries where you have debates with all candidates, then the candidates are going to be incentivized to not go to extreme polarized statements in order to get those few people from their party to vote for them. They're going to be incentivized to appeal to the broader audience who's there. So again, I don't know how challenging it would be to change things, but this is the reality we're in. If part of our goal is to reduce polarizations, get the best candidates, incentivize them to state and run on platforms that serve all of Arizona, then we should be looking at that. And it's not just general debates. Let me address that. Most of the elections are determined in the primary debates, and independent voters are really taken away from that. And that's now the majority of independent voters. So obviously, I feel strongly about that for a reason. And it's not just because I am an independent voter, but I want to make sure that's a consideration. When I go into these discussions with people who are in parties, independents are not talked about. And yet there's such a huge part of the process now. And no, primary debates are not just for partisan issues. They are for all of us. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, Tara, I just want to clarify your position. First of all, let me also say I'm an independent, and I've been an independent for a very long time, as long as I can remember. And are you saying that an independent candidate running in Legislative District 1 should be able to take part in a primary debate? Say they're running for the House in LD1. An independent should be taking part in that? Or are you focusing more on from the voter, there should be one debate among all House candidates so that you and I as independent voters can look at all the candidates together and decide which primary we want to vote in?
My last comments were really directed towards the voter, but really what I'm always thinking about is how can we create a better system for the state, for everyone? And given what is happening, and maybe this is not the realm for it, but it's where we are going in the future, should we be looking at, and I would certainly argue for it, a system where independent candidates are a part of a primary debate? I don't think that's exactly what we're talking about here at the moment, but the reality is we're disenfranchising or disincentivizing as well independent voters, independent candidates, and the system, it's very clear, is currently creating more polarization and division and not about solutions. So yes, those are big major changes. I get that, but these are the changes in the works. And I think it's at least important to have those in the back of our mind as we look at these changes, because that is where we are now, where we're going in the future. Maybe we can't make all those changes right now, but that's the reality of the future where we're at. I look at it very big picture.
For the ease of Chris, who's going to be taking notes and saying what our recommendation is, what do most of you think? And let's focus first of all on primaries. Should there be one primary election for all House candidates, or should those be divided? What's the consensus?
I can see benefit in having them divided. The only pushback I have on that is if you're looking at a 2-hour time block, you need to publicize which debate starts and ends when, because, you know, as a general voter, I'm not going to sit there and try to watch 2 hours if I only want to watch the Republican debate or the Democratic debate. But I think in the primary, it makes sense to do by party, and in the general to do by House and Senate. That's my vote.
Here's one piece that I've been thinking about. I see both sides of this. One of the things I'm struck by is what Gina shared with us before we jumped into this call, which was, what has the feedback been from 2022 candidates and members of the public? And unless I misunderstood, I didn't get the sense that this has been a bubbling large concern that has come up from anyone that participated in 2022. And so I guess I'm just hesitant and cautious about going all in on supporting a large change if this isn't something that has been loudly spoken to clean elections over the last cycle.
There's a bit of a polling bias to that. The sample consists of people who participated. This is an issue to all the candidates who didn't participate and wouldn't have been included in anecdotal feedback on how did you enjoy your debate.
Yeah, I'm trying to tell you, because I've been there. Constantine's been there. You know, all the other stuff is you know, you're part of the process, and that's fine. But I'm the guy that's had to debate or decide not to debate or whatever. And I'm just saying that I'm not trying to make it. I'm not trying to make it difficult. I've said it over the years that, you know, you need to make some of these changes, and that's why you don't have participation. I mean, you're looking for participation. And Tara, you and I are in agreement. I don't have a problem with independents getting involved. But that would be in the general election, because they don't really have anybody to debate unless it's two independents. I don't know if there could be two independents running, but yeah, they should be they should definitely be part of the process. But yeah, we know that Democratic primary and Republican primary are two different things to get to the general.
I wonder, it'll be an easy question for Tara, Chris, and Gina. Trying to think of how to mechanically fix this. If you had a 2-hour debate and you've got House and Senate Republicans and Democrats are all in there, and it's one-stop shopping for independents. It's easy from a mechanical standpoint because you've got one thing on the schedule. It's a single Zoom. Wouldn't it be fairly easy to modify that to where, I don't know if it's 2 1-hour debates or 4 30-minute debates, whatever, but it's still a single Zoom session. Like, we can all be on the screen. All the candidates can be there if they want to. It's just the only ones that are speaking for the first half hour are the Republicans running for the House or the candidates without. In other words, it's still a single logistically, it's one single event. From a marketing standpoint, you may schedule so we know who gets what hour or what half hour. For the independents, they're still sitting there for a single session that lasts the exact same amount of time. It's just kind of like we have these breakouts. The first X amount of time is this race. The next amount of time is this race. No one has to log on or off. It's a single thing. And that might address the technical requirements, the broadcaster's needs. It's still just a single moderator. The independents only tune in once, but you've packaged it in content that voters can get what they want without having to stick around for all the stuff they don't want.
I think that's interesting.
I think that makes sense.
Before we run out of time, are there other changes that we want to talk about? There's been some discussion about moderators. Gina spelled out the format of debates. Should we make it less 1 minute here, 2 minutes here, more of a conversational thing? Any other changes that come to mind?
Mr. Chairman and members, if just a heads up, I do anticipate a future agenda item will be specifically devoted to moderators. So just letting you know, you're certainly still welcome to talk about it now because it is part of the format. I just wanted to let you know that we will have that discussion in the future as well.
Thank you. So any other possible changes to the format? Kathy, seems like you want to.
Hey there. I had a quick question. There is a separate debate for House and a separate debate for Senate, correct? Or is it all LD5 or LD12?
Everybody's lumped together currently.
I
So
wonder.
are we talking about primary or general? And you're talking about legislature, not Congress.
Correct.
Okay. Gina, do you want to address that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, member So Mello, that is, so currently in 2022, our current process, we lump it all together. So LD1, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats all together. That's one event, one debate. The discussion right now is, should we break it out? Should we separate by party, by chamber?
Right. I like the idea of separating by chamber. And for one reason, just searchability for people watching. If you're trying to decide who to vote for, if you're going to have to vote for House members and Senate members. So, in searching for that information, if you're not watching the debate live, it would be a lot cleaner. I can look for LD12 Senate or LD12 House. I like the idea of separating the races. I don't know where people might come down on that. I'll defer to everybody else on whether you want to combine, the parties in the same debate. I was just, as a voter, people sit at their kitchen table and try to figure out, okay, this race, this race, this race. And if they're searching, they might be able to discern a little better information about who's running in a particular race if the events were separated.
The other is that also you stand out if you don't show up, if there's only 2 people running for the Senate. So the public gets to know whether or not you're hiding from them or not, as opposed to putting them all on at one time. You go, Joe Blow couldn't make it tonight in the beginning, and then nobody knows why Joe Blow wasn't there at that point.
Yeah, this is Carl Gentles again. I agree with Kathy. I do like breaking it out by chamber. In all honesty, you have, House and Senate all in the same debate. We don't vote that way. We vote by chamber. And I think it'd be valuable to hear from the candidates based on, their chamber representation. That the one thing that concerns me, Bob, you can talk to this. You've done multiple of these directly, is the time factor to put on so many debates. So if we break it up, that means we're doubling the debates that are aired. Now, from a production standpoint, that's pretty significant. From a viewer standpoint, you're opted into whichever one you want, so it really doesn't make a difference. But it might make it easier to decide which one you're going to watch. And I think to Constantine, is that her name? Constantine's point some time ago, Republicans watch Republicans, Democrats watch Democrats. It's just the way it goes. So I think there's a lot more to think about. But I do think there's real opportunity to really narrow it down for the person watching and give them a better option of what makes, what's more interesting to them.
I agree.
Yeah, and while I agree Republicans will watch Republicans and Democrats will watch Democrats, it is much better if we all watch together.
Oh, I agree. I probably shouldn't have said it that way, but we know what the reality is. In fact, I like watching all the debates, but I'm just talking generally from the audience.
Sure.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you as well.
I remember showing up to one Democratic debate, and I think it might have been the state Democratic Party convention, and Marco Lopez, and forgive me for not remembering who he was running against in that cycle, was debating. And I liked thinking that, one of these people is going to be on the ballot. It's good to know what they're both going to say. And I think every media outlet, including the Arizona Republic and the Yellow Sheet and the Capital Times, covered the mere fact that I went into the room to watch that debate. So I think we kid ourselves and we say Republicans want Democrats to come and Democrats want Republicans to come. That wasn't the point I was going to make, though, Mr. Chairman. I want us to not lose sight of Mr. Robeson's comment from last month. And Gina, forgive me if this is a moderator specific question. Maybe we can mark it down to raise whenever that agenda item is appropriate. But one thing Bob mentioned last time is if you have people who are subject matter experts who are engaging candidates, it matters a lot less whether they're Republicans and Democrats or independents and whether you mix House and Senate. It makes the information shared much more relevant and much more interesting and much more helpful to inform decisions by voters. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we think about format changes and that sort of thing. I think it might have been Chris Klein who said, let's don't break something that's not broken. It's possible that what we're doing now isn't broken. It's just that we need people who are more thoughtful to engage with the candidates, not so much as referees, but more as policy subject matter knowledgeable experts.
So in the spirit of time here, because we got 2 minutes remaining, can I summarize what I'm hearing and get some feedback if this is missing something real quick? So what I'm planning to say representing us is that clearly there's a lot of varying thoughts and opinions, both in support of moving to party-based debates, chamber-based debates, and opposition to change. On the one hand, we talked about the fact that the topics of conversation are different by party and chamber, and that we could get more robust conversations if we make them separate. We also talked about the fact that we couldn't lose engagement from voters, including independents that want to see everybody at once. But in total, while there isn't a single idea that it seems like everyone here rallies behind, one of the ideas that seemed to spark a lot of engagement was the idea of supporting a primary debate that's split between parties, but remains a single event and has candidates speaking based upon party and chamber at different times.
Sounds good.
Sounded good.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's clear that they really are broken out within that time. It's not that they just speak at different times, but debates within the debate.
I can.
But they are clearly segmented.
Okay.
Very well done, Chris.
And we have 24 seconds to spare.
Wow.
All in favor of Chris doing this every time? Raise your
No.
hand.
What I'm really fascinated to see is if the other group comes back with the same thing as us, or if we see something totally different, because I have a feeling opinions are very varied over there too.
So I think, is everyone back together now? There's a lot of people here, and I hadn't counted, but. Okay, why don't we start with Group A, which I think, Gina, that was the group you and I were in, wasn't it? So Chris Klein was our spokesman. Chris, you want to report on what we decided?
Yeah, so we had a lot of varying thoughts and opinions, both in support of moving to party-based debates or chamber-based debates, as well as opposition to any change whatsoever. And we spent a lot of time flushing out both sides. We talked about the fact that on the one hand, the topics of conversation are different by party, they're different by chamber, and that we could get more robust conversations if we made them separate. But we also talked about how that could create fragmentation, that we might lose engagement from voters, especially independents that wanted to see everyone all together, as well as conversations about what that looked like logistically. So in total, we couldn't really get everyone to rally behind a single idea. However, we got the most support around supporting a primary debate that is split between parties, but that remains a single event and has, in essence, debates within the debate, so that candidates could speak based upon party or chamber, but those that wanted to continue to see everyone could continue to participate and watch the entire event over the course of that hour or 2-hour event.
Okay, thank you, Chris. What about the spokesman for Group B? Who is that?
Mr. Chairman, we are Group B. Who is our spokesperson? Who would like to speak? I think Member Fowler or Member Senseman, Member Sharon, Member Liggett, anyone, please?
I'm happy to speak on our behalf if you choose, if you wish.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Member Sharon.
So our top level topics were on the time allocated for the candidate. Should it be hard or soft? That was our top level discussion. It seemed that the majority was in the opinion that it ought to be a hard stop. Second was not having an over much into the number of moderators or selection of moderators influencing whether it should be a hard stop, the amount of time allocated to the debates. The third was the notion of should the candidates get the questions in advance? And we did not come to consensus on that, I believe. If I'm wrong, Rod, Jody, anyone else, please correct me. We seem to be equally split in terms of we should send it ahead or we shouldn't. The other area for somewhat lengthy discussion was, is it a debate or a forum? The whole area of timing, equity, of making sure candidates have time, and also managing the questions and thinking about the questions so that the opportunity for the candidates doesn't become one of pontification and posturing, but really answering in a thoughtful manner the questions that voters care about so that voters are making informed decisions. I think I captured all of it. Avery, did I?
Yes, you did a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Some crossover, but some each of the groups focused on somewhat different topics. And we're going to do this again on the rules for debate events. Gina, you want to talk about what we're going to discuss in our next breakout sessions?
Mr. Chairman, members, yes. So just to confirm, we are on the agenda item. Is that 6 for discussion?
6.
Yes.
6.
Okay. Working session discussion on the rules for debate events. So we will break out into our groups again. This will be randomly assigned. And here's where we will have discussion about when the event is occurring, what rules will be followed by the candidates, the moderator, to that extent. Avery and I do have some questions to help each group get started to help facilitate the discussion, but this would be the time to discuss things such as time limits, things like that, hard stops. So Kathy, if you want to go ahead and separate us into our breakout sessions, and again, that will be Avery facilitating one, and I'll be in the other with Chairman Kimball, and both will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel after the fact. All right. Okay, so first action item is to select a spokesperson.
Anyone want to be volunteered to do this?
I'd like to nominate Carl Gentles. He'd be my spokesman.
Oh, you know what? I swear I knew you were going to say that.
Are you willing, Carl?
Sure.
Okay.
Whatever Paul Sensman says, I'll do.
Okay, that's a good start. Okay.
All
What
right.
part of the, go ahead, Gina.
Okay, sure. So we have some questions for you all to consider. Again, it's whatever you wish to discuss that has to do with the rules, the overall rules for how the debates are conducted. I will start by saying that some of the standards that we have for all of our debates are, the obvious ones: proper decorum, respect, no attacks on candidates, near equal speaking time for all candidates, as much as we can manage, and a neutral moderator. And what we'll do here is I will drop into the chat just some bullet points that we have, that you can, if anything stands out to you that you want to discuss, these will be here for your consideration. But again, we can, time limits, should we have those? Should they be hard or soft? Whereas, the moderator will kind of encourage you to wrap up your thought. Okay, you get 15 more seconds. Or is it just a hard stop? Should we cut mics? Should we have that true debate style or do more of a forum? Should we allow opening and closing statements even, and the time lengths that we allocate for that? So there's a few things there in the chat to get you started. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, I remember Torgerson, I know you are on the phone, so I'll just read through these. Time limits, hard or soft. Rebuttals, should we allow rebuttals for all candidates? And if we do rebuttals, is it just whoever wants to speak up, or do we have to go down the line? Do we mute mics? Again, the forum style or true debate, back and forth, are interruptions allowed? If so, must they be to that point, just as our legislature? What do we do if the candidate doesn't answer the question? If they get asked a very specific question and their response is something entirely different, must the candidate stick to that topic, to their question? Do we, again, allow opening and closing statements? Should we change up the speaking order ahead of time? Do we identify the topics to be discussed and allocate specific time sections for those topics? So if, the candidates and the stakeholders said, okay, we want to talk about education, healthcare, and water, does that mean that, we schedule 15 minutes for each topic? And then, so again, a standard, as we said, that the moderators are neutral, but may the moderators, while not engaging in debating the candidate, is the moderator permitted to provide context on a question? So for example, if the moderator is a subject matter expert, and they get a question in about water, can the moderator provide a little bit more background and context on it to further allow for the candidate to respond? And do we allow, going back to those interruptions in the back and forth, must speakers be acknowledged by the moderator before speaking? Do we make it a little bit more formal? So those are just some of the bullet points that we have to help facilitate this discussion. Again, whatever you all feel is important and relevant to what you think the rules of engagement for the candidate should be and how the moderator should flow the debate, control the debate. Those are all for you to discuss. Thank you.
And I just wanted to mention one thing that Gina mentioned in our last session. We're going to have a discussion solely on moderators. So we won't want to get too much into that. And I assume, Gina, that discussion will be focused on how we choose them, who the moderators ought to be, not so much their role during the debate. Am I right, Gina?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, what do we all think about time limits? Let's start there. Does anybody have so whether we're talking about legislative or statewide, both can be, obviously are different circumstances and formats, but how do you all feel about time limits? Should we be monitoring those very strictly? Should we have hard time limits?
I would actually say be soft on it, but fair. And if somebody deserves to have, because somebody ran over 20 seconds, should his opponent be allowed to respond with an extra 20 seconds per se?
You have a time limit. I mean, you have to have some structure and some basic guidance and rules. If you've told the candidates, we're not going to be militant about it, but 2 minutes means 2 minutes. It might be 1:45 or 2:15, but 2 minutes doesn't mean 3 minutes. At the same time, if you're always over, we are tracking your overall time. We're going to let candidates even this up. So be prepared to get, if you keep giving me 2:15 instead of 2, for your last question, you might be down to 30 seconds because you used up all your extras, because we're going to be fair and make sure everybody has a fair chance. If you're clear in advance, that's perfectly fine.
I agree with CQ.
How do you all
Am I
feel
still
about
part of the
interruptions?
conversation? Is anybody there?
Yes, we still hear you.
Okay. No, it just went dead quiet.
How do you all feel about interruptions? So if a candidate is responding to a question, moderator asks them a question that came in from a voter, candidate is responding, and they're about a minute into their response and their opponent jumps in and interrupts them. Should the moderator allow that interruption and then circle back to the candidate that is interrupted, or say, okay, hold off, I'll come to you when so-and-so has finished their thought? What do we think about interruptions and allowing for that kind of interaction between the candidates?
The latter is probably better, just so it doesn't turn into a total food fight. You don't want to be so militant. I mean, to a certain degree, how a candidate conducts themselves in a debate tells the voters an awful lot about them, not just what they say, but how they say it, how they behave. So, you interrupt sort of aggressively. It's fine for the moderator to say, "I tell you, it's still his time, but let me come to you and get that just as soon as we're done here." And then get back. If the candidate knows they're going to have a chance to make their point, they don't have to try to force their way into the conversation.
Agreed.
Gina, this Paul Senseman, I'm going to find myself in a rare moment of perhaps slightly disagreeing with Mr. Carrard. I think I think we want to build confidence in what we're going to get at a forum, and that'll help. If we confidence build, it'll help drive more consistent turnout of the candidates, participation of the candidates, and so having rules that are complied with, I think are important. I will also say though, that shouldn't be just left to the moderator or moderators. Then you start getting into a position where those individuals, be they journalists or some other professional that are hosting, end up interjecting themselves far greater than they should be involved in this. So if you have rules, then you need devices to enforce them, not having the moderator themselves having to perform that function. It's just that just doesn't work as well. But sound devices, audible sounds, those sort of things, you're never going to get down to the second, but they do help folks comply, and I think they create some conditions for candidates and for the people that are advising them to have confidence that this is roughly how it's going to work out, and your expectations can be then met at the end of the event, and then that will build more participation, which ultimately is what we're looking for voters to get the maximum exposure to candidates that they can.
Okay, well, at the risk of sounding like I didn't get it, I think the point was is if a candidate's interrupting another candidate, that the moderator, which one of the, I would say a synonym of moderator is referee, would step in and say, hey, we will hear you after they finish talking, not allowing it to start to spin out of control. Because when it spins out of control, you lose confidence in the system. So I think CQ's dead on point.
I think it's okay if the moderator also uses the mute button. Now we could, and I don't know, maybe everybody's muted. And then I ask you, and because it would stop. So if we want to do Paul's idea where we kind of prevent interruptions, again, show them how to use the raise your hand button that I can't find. But where if you're muted and I ask you a question, then I unmute you. And then around that 2-minute mark, I'm going to say, hey, we're about out of time here. Please, wrap it up. Somebody who wants to cut in, who's raised their hand, I can go to that person unmute, but if you're muted, you're doing all this stuff on the screen, but like nobody can hear what you're saying. Or is it better to kind of leave them unmuted and let the moderator, referee the fight? I don't know, Paul, would it be better if we just, when it's your turn, we unmute you?
I think that drives more consistency and more confidence so that there's the expectations are met by candidates across the board. They know what's coming, and it's not quite, we don't get these concerns and debates about whether or not somebody was treated fairly or not by a human. It's more driven by structure. And the more structure you have, I think the more confidence you get that the turnout is driven then significantly.
It can get boring, but it would be predictable and stable, and you eliminate concerns over moderator bias to a certain degree because your time was your time and he didn't let it get out of control, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I'm envisioning a couple of moderators and not one. So you'd have folks that, equal spectrum, political spectrum represented too, Constantine. So I think we're setting up folks that are not objective or independent to be stuck in the middle of a food fight. And I feel badly for them. Nobody could do that. It's really impossibly difficult to be a referee in these kind of situations. And so I think if you have a little more structure, you set these up for success.
The other thing I would add, and then I'll stop talking here, the clean election debates are good, but it's just one debate. If you're running for a primary for something, you're probably going to be in a half a dozen of these things, most of which are live action, sitting in the same room where it is kind of more the food fight. So if you guys want to be a little more restrictive with yours, that's fine. I mean, in essence, you will be providing some variety in the schedule because most debates are everybody in the same room. They're not online. There is interruption and you kind of get all that flair. So if you guys want one that's very structured, where literally everybody's on mute until it's your turn to speak, that's fine. You're not setting a standard for all debates. That's just how the clean elections debate will be. And if you're different because you're extra civilized and it's never a food fight, that may not be a bad thing.
What about the questions themselves? Should the candidates, how much should candidates be told in advance? Should the candidates be told, we're going to spend 10 minutes on education, 10 minutes on water, et cetera? Or should the candidates be told, these are the questions we're going to be asked? Is there any benefit to doing it one way or the other?
There's benefits to each. If the point of the interview is to kind of make it as informative as possible for the viewer, and you give the candidates all the questions in advance, they have time to come up with the best possible answers, to really practice, to write it all out, and to give you as a viewer like their best possible answer. If you're looking to actually measure the mental capacity of your candidates, which is also a good idea, and you just don't want whatever answers were written for them, not knowing the questions in advance, even you may know the topics, but if you don't know the exact question, will give us an idea of the intellectual capability of the candidate. Because if they give you just the only answer they wrote down, even though if it doesn't really fit the question, you're dealing with somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about. So you guys might have to decide what the goal is. If it's supposed to be both, informative, like you also want to disclose, is this guy just reading, or does he actually have any idea what he's talking about? Then don't give them the answers or the questions. You can give them the topics, but you may not want to give them the actual questions. On the other hand, if you don't mind that they're really, really prepared, you can give them the questions.
One thing you just said, Constantine, kind of struck a bell with me. You called it an interview. Do we want this to be an interview, or do we want it to be more of a back and forth debate with the candidates engaging in each other? Which is best for the voters?
Well, I think if you're trying to drive viewership, then you want back and forth between the candidates. I think strong moderators do this well. You know, they control the flow of the conversation and make sure everybody gets a chance to deal with the questions, and they can ask follow-up questions, which, you know, you see sometimes in other countries, like in England, you know, you see an American go on English TV and they kind of get blown out of the water because, you know, the interviewer will ask a follow-up question and push them, and it's much more revealing for the viewers. So I think moderators and follow-up questions make sense. On the question of the questions, giving them in advance, I think it might make sense to give topics in advance, but then allow the moderator to figure out how to word the questions.
Rod, what do you think about having a portion of it? So, okay, here are our 5 topics, and then you each get to submit a question you want us to ask. Now, obviously, candidates will submit questions that put their opponents in an odd spot that contrasts well in their favor. But I mean, that's what every election is supposed to be. I'm contrasting me to you, you to me. Does it discourage participation because I'm afraid of that tough question? Does it encourage it because I get to ask my tough question? Like, what do you think about, because that will create healthy friction. Like,
yeah, I think healthy friction is good. I think it's better for the moderators to kind of formulate these questions. But you know, it just feels it gets into the game show situation when, like, you know, I get to ask you, well, Mr. Carrard, how come, you know, you were arrested for DUI in 2018? Obviously, I have no idea if Mr. Carrard even drinks. I'm just saying, you know,
not professionally.
But I think that's a great example of why it should be there. Because one thing I want is somebody to represent me that can think on their feet and answer a question like that appropriately, can come back and say, what in the world are you talking about? You know, somebody that's not thrown off, that's not overly offended by a stupid question, that can sit there and go, wow, you took that opportunity to ask that question? Well, here's your answer. Why didn't you ask a better question? Like, I mean, somebody that can take that and run with it, show me they think on their feet, they can handle themselves without getting over the top. That would be, that's a fantastic reason to have them interject a question that they want. Because the answer they get is going to be the most telling of all, without creating a circus.
fair point.
If you have a
You know,
candidate that doesn't
happy-
want to participate because they're afraid of a tough question, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that's a candidate you necessarily should be catering to when you're designing your debate rules.
No, in fact, that's one that you want. If they're going to cower from that, you got to make the point that they refuse to participate, and it's kind of pathetic. I mean, obviously, it's got to not be like, do you still molest your children? I mean, you can't have, you know, something crazy, but a tough. Exactly.
Isn't that what we're talking about when you have the candidate submit a question? You know, that just opens up for, you know, the questions just to go completely off the rails, right? You know,
Well,
like
these
kind of questions where
the fact that they're in advance, wouldn't you think that somebody goes, you know what? I mean, a moderator, whoever could go, this is so far out of line. I mean, if they're a little out of line, let them hang themselves. But they go up and say, hey, do you still molest children? Well, you know, seriously, we're not going to let you ask that question because that's just way out of line.
so it's
like,
incumbent on the moderator then to be very judicious about the question that gets through.
So you get to submit 3 questions and we'll pick one or something. Because
Right.
what I'm anticipating is explain your vote on HB whatever this
Right.
bill. I want to know why you voted yes when you told us in your last campaign you were going to be a no. I mean, that's the kind of question I'm anticipating to create contrast, put you on the spot a little bit, make me look good. You're going to have your own question back at me for something else. If it's something that's decidedly personal, something, and you can just say, hey, your question cannot include whatever attacks or mentions of a candidate's family, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you could probably put some limitations on it, but we want you as a candidate to know that the issues that you're campaigning on are going to be a part of this debate. They are not likely to be the entirety of this debate. There are certain general themes that every voter cares about. But we also want you to know that this time you're spending here is going to be worth something for you, that you're going to get a chance to talk about the thing you want to talk about. That's one option we could do. And the question is, how do you get that one thing? Give me 3 questions and I'll pick one. Unless they're all so terrible, I'm not come back and go, guy, every one of those violates our rules on attacking a candidate's family or personal or whatever, if you've done something that's personally scandalous in your official capacity, if I don't know, you're doing something at the legislature on property that you're not supposed to be doing or something, maybe that's a question. Frankly, if you don't allow it as a question, I can still work it into one of my answers. Like, it's not like you're not going to stop us from bringing it up and talking about it. But most questions will be policy based. The question is, do you want to offer candidates the chance to submit a question as an incentive to participate in the debates? And then does it make the debate more interesting? Sorry.
No, my apologies. I just wanted to provide some background on when we do just what we do as staff. Sometimes we do get questions that are very inappropriate, and we don't even share those with the moderator. So we screen those here at Clean Elections as staff. Anything that is vulgar, we withhold those, and we don't even share them with the moderator to let those pass through. So I just wanted to provide clarification that the moderator is actually removed from that process if it's that extreme. And then if it comes to the point where the question is worded in such a way that it's trying to be like a gotcha or something, but you could still tell there's clearly a substantive discussion there, a policy discussion, or why did you vote that way? Then yes, obviously we will still give it to the moderator. And then at that point, the moderator may reframe it so it's not coming off as an attack on the candidate, but more about let's get to that substantive policy discussion here. So I just wanted to provide clarification on what we do right now.
Great. I would imagine some of those public comments are being submitted by people on behalf of the campaigns. So to a certain degree, just asking them in advance for, hey, what question do you want, might eliminate some of those public submissions that,
Mr. Chairman, can I do a cross question to another member?
I don't think that's allowed by the rules of the debate.
Clearly, we need for the Clean Elections staff to screen it first. But I am curious because CQ manages so many legislative candidates that are germane to this discussion. I mean, on the statewide races, our debates and forums tend to be one or the other. It's a subject matter debate or it's an all-in debate. And typically the candidate staff is submitting things. But CQ, can you help us understand how active would you be? Would you be submitting things on behalf of your candidate? I'm not suggesting anything nefarious here, just, on the up and up. If you had the opportunity to say, as an incentive, we're going to let candidates and their committees engage in the question asking. Is that something that incentivizes you? Is that helpful? I'm just kind of, it's a practical matter. How does that hit you?
More often than not, it's likely to incentivize because the whole point of the debate is, I want to contrast myself with the other person and I want to win that contrast. And some of these debates, frankly, can be really where we had so it's for 2018. It was Republican primary debate. It's like an hour long. I swear they must have spent 50 minutes talking about K-12 issues. K-12 is big, it's half the budget, but it's not 50 out of 60 minutes for a Republican primary voter. But it's where the moderator's interest was. And you do those and you're like, okay, we should never do this again. Whereas if you know that in advance, we're going to hit these 5 issues, that's already some relief. If you get the opportunity to say, hey, can we at least talk about this issue? If I can't submit the question, can I at least make sure this issue is being discussed? because it gives me a chance to pivot to the thing I want to say. Even that would be something. If we got a chance to actually submit a couple of questions, I think that would be an incentive. If you've got a candidate who's got a particular area of weakness and you don't want that question, that's the decision you're gonna have to make. But frankly, your opponent's probably smart enough to bring it up anyway. So I don't see it as being a reason to avoid a debate, but it might be an additional reason to participate.
So we're
Well,
down
just to your earlier point, sorry, just real quick, to your earlier point, if they don't get asked, they're going to work it into an answer anyway, right?
But it might be cleaner and neater if it's in the form of an actual question.
And it takes away some of the circus atmosphere.
The question also kind of encourages the opponent to have to answer, because I can work it in as a side shot, but it can be brushed off and our next question is, and it never comes back up. Whereas if it's an actual question, your opponent kind of has to answer, or at least has to respond. They can dance sideways if they want to, but if there's something that is of interest, if there's something that makes a difference between the candidates, or that you think this is the thing voters should know between me and you to help them decide, then that's probably going to be of value to your viewers. And so the question is, how do we get there?
And I'm sorry, I have to jump in. I know we have just a few minutes left, and I know we typically reserve the last minute for the spokesperson to recap. But before we do that, and I think this may just be for Rod only, and I know you turned your camera off, so I'm not sure if you're still at your, okay, perfect. So the last
Dealing with dog issues.
Oh, sorry. The last group, the last breakout session, they sort of went out of order on the agenda. And so I needed to touch base here and allow anybody that was in the previous group, so who wasn't with me, and I think here that would just be you, Rod, to have the opportunity, if you wanted to weigh in any opinions on separating our debates in the primary by party and by chamber. So again, the last group, they didn't really focus on that.
We never got to that question in Group B.
Right.
My sense is that it should be separated by chamber. I thought Bob Robson made a fair point about that. And I don't think it should be separated by party. And I know the independents won't even be in the primaries, but I just think if you're trying to drive participation, you're trying to drive viewership, if that's what our goal is, to get more people to pay attention, then having an open forum with all the candidates for a particular office is useful. That might be a statute problem, the way your statute is written, I have no idea. But I would say,
but that's for a primary debate. So like for
Yeah.
the House primary, you have the Democrats and Republicans answering
Yeah.
questions at the same time.
Yeah, and it's an hour, and because I think then the viewer gets a real sense about what the parties care about, and how the members of one party will deal with another party. And I mean, I've seen these cattle calls, where like you got 13 people on the stage, and it's actually interesting to see what for people in one party to see the people in the other party and kind of get a sense of what they care about, what they want to talk about. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I know we have just a few seconds left. Carl, if you have any clarification you need from the group to report back.
No, I think I got everything.
Okay.
Hopefully I captured it fairly accurately.
I have no doubt you did.
We'll see.
We'll see, yes.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. I think we're all back together now. We'll first go to the spokesperson for Group A. Carl, what did your group talk about?
Sure. We had several topics that we discussed, but it came down to, based on time, just a few here. One was on time limits, if we should have them. I think the group consensus was that We should be soft on those time limits, but fair. But we still needed some structure on some basic rules, some basic ground rules. And then the moderator could use their discretion in terms of the time that each candidate has to give each a fair chance, but be very clear up front about what those rules were. A lot of discussion around interruptions. Should the moderator allow interruptions? What protocol is around that? Well, I think the consensus was that we want to have some decorum that would allow, that would basically avoid an all-out food fight. I think that was the technical political term that was used. So more structured, allow some injection, but we really need to institute some civility, ensure some civility around how those injections occurred. But we want to be not too militant on enforcing the rule. It really comes down to the moderator controlling the interruptions and indicating to the interrupter that they would come back to allow them a few seconds to respond. But overall, having rules that are complied with was really important. And there's some discussion about whether or not that should be left to the moderator or not, because that puts them in a position of potentially being, being too far injected into the conversations. So there's also a conversation about using some devices to help control the conversation, like some sound or audio devices, maybe a mute button that would be used. So there's a little bit of conversation about that. But overall,
is that cool?
I am late. Hey,
but there was really a conversation about really being driven by structure, because that, as I heard from the conversation, would produce more confidence in the debate and more turnout. Might be a little bit less exciting, but does institute a little bit more control and structure. And then finally, about questions in the debate, how should those be handled? Should they be provided up front or only at the events? And I think the general consensus was that give the topic up front, but leave it up to the moderator to ask the specific question. And that would help, I think that would help really gauge the candidate on how they're able to handle the question, if they're able to think on their feet, their mental acuity, et cetera. So I think hopefully that captures the general conversation. At the end, Rod McLeod was asked about the previous question about the breaking out sessions, whether by party or by let's see, party or by chamber, and he seemed to think that separating by chamber makes sense, but not by party. So hopefully that captured it. If anybody has anything else to add, please speak up.
No, I think you did a very good job, Carl. Who's the spokesman for Group B?
It is me, and
You again, Chris.
it is me. Yes, drafted at the last minute, but we're going to make it work. Our theme, I think, of conversation was rallying around the idea that structure is important to ensure a fair and robust debate. And so we talked a lot about time limits, and it seemed like one of the points we rallied behind was that time limits were important, that those time limits should apply to both a candidate speaking as well as to rebuttal opportunities, and that because of that, interruptions by candidates need to be minimized. We spoke extensively, as Group A did, about how key the moderator is for these debates, not just to literally moderating the debate, but also to ensure transparency and clarity to both the candidates throughout the debate, but equally as important to the voters that are watching or participating. We talked about the fact that these debates are a reflection on clean elections, and because of that, there's nothing more sacrosanct than making sure that these debates come across as equitable and fair and non-biased, and that is going to, no matter what format we proceed with, be dependent upon very strong moderators who can act in the interest of the voters without coming across as biased to one candidate or the other. We also talked a little bit about whether it was appropriate for moderators to push back on a candidate if something inflammatory or black and white, factually incorrect was said. And I think we all seem to again rally behind the idea that it's a very fine line and a difficult line. But one of the points that perhaps most well-spokenly described this was to say the answer might be to ask clarifying questions instead of to simply try to rebut something that was said.
Thank you. Two very good discussions. Very good. With that, I want to move on to item 7, public comment. This is the time for consideration of comments and suggestions from the public. Action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date or responding to criticism. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment? You can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, come off mute, or do something else to get my attention. Nathan Madden?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I will repeat my previous question, and then I also have a comment from the breakout session. My previous comment was that I know that this commission has had a somewhat tenuous relationship with the Cronkite School, the public broadcasting system of Arizona. What has the commission and staff done to either repair this or move forward with a different broadcasting partner?
Well, as I was saying just a minute ago, we're not in a position to respond directly to that, but we'll get into discussing broadcast partners and other partners and moderators in future sessions.
Okay, and then if I may, I have one more comment referring to what I witnessed in the breakout session.
Okay.
I just want to say that it was said multiple times that there was an unwillingness to divide by party in the primary debates. If you do not divide by partisan basis, then all you are doing is creating a second general debate with more candidates. That's all that does. So I would definitely recommend that this commission stay away from that line of thinking, because the primaries are for the partisan discussions. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chairman.
Mark, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Eventually I'll learn how to operate Zoom. Item 8, adjournment. Our next meeting will be 1 week from today, April 20th at 10 a.m. If there are no objections, we will adjourn. Seeing no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.